wait another 5 minutes or something.
Yeah. Just make sure it's recorded in the right position. I don't want it to, okay, it's fine. Okay. So maybe let's start now. Uh, I'll
Sure.
just do a brief introduction and you can just start afterwards. Um, so hi everyone. It's our honor today to have Mike Paavola to give us today's OPAM workshop. And Mike is a PhD candidate at the University of Iowa under the supervision of Dr. Cassidy Moore. And in September, he will begin a postdoc position in Dr. Melissa Bowe's lab at LMU. And he has published research in high-profile peer-reviewed journals, including Psychonomic Bulletin and Review and the Journal of Vision. He also has extensive experience using virtual reality techniques in experimental psychology research. So without further ado, Mike.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to share some of the information that I have learned over the course of my career for all of you. And while I'm going through the actual talk here today, feel free to type any questions that you might have for me in chat. I'll probably be taking a couple of breaks during the actual presentation, and then Zeshwan and I will sort of go over those. So yeah, without further ado, we can, oh, let me do this.
Mhm.
We can get started. And you can still see my screen, correct, Zeshwan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this talk here today is going to be sort of a cursory understanding and a cursory look at how to use VR in psychological research. And it's going to be covering a lot of the basic things. I'm not going to be going into sort of how to code an experiment or how to even install packages or get started in that way. It's mainly meant for your understanding of if you don't really know how VR works, if you are maybe reviewing a paper that uses VR that you just want to know a little bit more, if you want to start integrating VR into your own work, but just have no idea where to start, this is going to be the sort of basic task for you here today. So I'm going to talk about a few different topics. I'm going to talk about what virtual reality is, why do we want to use VR for psychological research, what do you need to get started, what can we record and measure using VR? And then what are some of the challenges that you probably should keep in mind when using virtual reality? So let's get started. What is virtual reality? Uh, there's no set definition really, but typically described as a three-dimensional virtual environment that you can perceive, navigate within, and interact with in the actual environment itself. These are two examples of some VR experiments that I created, and which you're placed into a virtual environment and you can actually move around and really feel what it's like to be in this experiment. Uh, Additionally, you might have heard some terminology that maybe you're confused about. I know a lot of people are once they get started. Some of these sort of acronyms like VR, AR, MR, XR, what exactly are these? VR stands for virtual reality, in which you are fully placed within a virtual environment with no aspects of the real world that can seep in. AR is augmented reality, in which there is a pass-through filter, which allows you to see the real world, but there is a virtual assets within that world and placed within it. So, for example, if you've ever played like Pokemon Go, for example, you have these little creatures that are placed within this environment, and they're not actually there, they're completely virtual, but they allow you to interact with them. And then MR, which is mixed reality, which has elements of both virtual reality and augmented reality. So it's usually the real world through a pass through, through a headset, and then with virtual elements within that environment, which allow you to interact with them in some way. And then XR stands for extended reality, and this is the sort of umbrella term that we use for all of these VR, AR, and MR. Today, we're just going to be talking about VR and the virtual environment. So, why do we want to use virtual reality? Well, there's lots of good reasons to use VR. Namely, VR still allows us to have a lot of experimental control within the environment. We can manipulate objects, we can create three-dimensional objects within the environment, we can measure precise timing, we can measure accurate distances. And so it allows us to maintain control like we do in our typical traditional lab tasks using computer monitors and other traditional psychophysical methods. However, VR has a unique quality which allows us to get an immersive experience. I'm not sure if all of everyone here has used VR or been in VR. Actually, I think there's like a raise hand button. Can you raise your hand if you have actually used VR or gone inside of a VR system? And we'll do just a quick little measure here. Yeah, so it looks like a few people have used it. And for those of you that have, it really does give you a strong feeling of being inside of an environment completely made up of this sort of these virtual assets and virtual objects, but you really feel like you are in those environments. And so not only does it allow you to sort of view the three dimensions, it allows you to interact with objects in sort of meaningful ways, as well as navigate this sort of fidelity, high fidelity situation, or this high fidelity room that you're in. Additionally, it allows us to continuously monitor things that would otherwise take specialized equipment to do. So we can get frame by frame information about the movements and positions of the head, the hands, the eyes, so on and so forth. And another one that I didn't put in this slide also is that virtual reality has a large field of view as well. So if you need to do tasks within the periphery, for example, it allows for a large field of view, and you would usually have to use like a big monitor for that type of things. So, in the sort of spectrum of using traditional lab techniques with high experimental control, but maybe lacks a lot of aspects of immersiveness, to the real world where we can barely control anything out in the actual environment, VR allows us to land somewhere in between. Where we can still maintain our control, precise timing, object manipulation, but also we can get a lot of those feelings of immersiveness that we are desperately needing in some of our tasks. So, what do we need to actually get started? Uh, this can be very confusing for a lot of people when they start looking at wanting to integrate VR into their own research. And so, typically, the VR system consists of, they look something like this, where it has a head mounted display, maybe some controllers. These systems fit on the face and they wear them as you are going through. You give them controllers and they can accurately uh, interact with the environment that you are creating. However, there are lots of other aspects of the VR system that you can add on into this. So, for example, there's these giant treadmills, which are very fun. There's these haptic backpacks that allow you to feel vibrations and things like that as well. So the sort of sky is endless as far as what you could do theoretically. But for the purposes of this talk, we're just going to talk about sort of the basic headset. So this is called a HMD, a head-mounted display. It fits onto the person's head and allows for you to view the virtual environment. It has display on the inside of the this front part, as well as the lenses. It has headphones for audio. It usually has controllers. However, you can also use things like gloves, depending on your needs. And how it works is how when you're tracking the actual system, there's a couple different ways. This is the Vive Pro I, which uses something called base stations, which are external sensors that you would place in the room around you. and it would capture your positioning from these external systems. However, there are internal gyroscopes which account for a person's position in a lot of other headsets as well. Uh, this is a lot of different brands that you can buy. There are many, 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 many different types of VR systems. Some of them are very useful for research. Some of them are very much not useful for research. However, I don't want you to get sort of bogged down with all of these different brands and what you want to sort of pick. I want to just focus on these three main systems, the HTC Vive system, Vario, and then Meta and Oculus. Here are a couple of the more popular brands for research specifically. So from Vive, there's the Pro Eye, as well as the newly made Focus Vision. From Meta, there's the Quest series, and the most recent of which is the Quest 3, as well as the upper echelon of virtual reality research uses things like Vario, which is, I have the arrow here presented. In my research, I have primarily used the Vive Pro Eye, which is sort of a workhouse, very powerful, very robust. We just recently switched over to the Focus Vision, which we have been having very good luck with. However, there are many other labs that also use things like the Meta series. And then, if you can, the Vario is a little bit more expensive system compared to the others. But it is very, very, very good, especially when dealing with things like eye tracking. The sort of first decision you will probably have to make when you want to get a new VR headset is whether you are going to be using this for a standalone, so just the headset, or if you are going to be connected to sort a more powerful computer when you're running these tasks. There are pros and cons, of course, to both of these. For the standalone headset, the computer is actually within the actual headset, and it is very portable. You don't have to deal with things like wires. It's very good for going out into the field and demonstrations, especially. However, the big setback is that you're not actually connected to computer, so you lose a lot of the performance. So things like bandwidth, if you're running particularly complicated models or rendering from the actual system, the standalone headset is you're gonna drop frames or you're gonna drop a certain performance. The PC connected headsets are much more powerful. They are very popular for what we do, and they run from the dedicated computer. They allow for a lot more flexibility in terms of your computations. It's very easy to integrate with certain things and very useful for running complex scenes, especially when you are rendering very high fidelity scenarios and environments. However, it's can be burdensome. That you can't really move with it that often, and you have to have it connected to the computer. And additionally, there are some headsets that have both. So, for example, the Focus Vision, you can run either PC connected, which is what we typically do, but when we have to bring it out into the field, we can actually use it as a standalone headset. Uh, I'm not sponsored, but I would like to briefly just plug this very cool website called vrcompare.com. It allows you to look at the different specs, the specifications of these different VR headsets. So right here, I just took a snapshot right before coming on today for the Vive Focus Vision versus the Meta Quest 3, and it will go through line by line and tell you all of the sort of differences in sort of field of view and computational power and what the different graphic systems are with on there. So this is a very useful website as well. The next big thing you have to make a decision about is in regards to what type of software you're going to be running. So the hardware part of it, the specific type of VR headset that you are going to be using, might actually dictate some of this as well. However, the software is where you're going to be programming, where you're going to be spending the vast majority of your time in when developing your experiments. And so it's very important to pick the one that works for you and your lab's need specifically. So the two most common types of game engines, which we are working inside of, are Unity and then Unreal. Unity is what I use in my own research. It's what a lot of people use within their own research. It is written in the C sharp language, and it is really, really, really powerful, as well as there is a lot of resources available for anybody that wants to use Unity. The other alternative is Unreal Engine. It is a very powerful game engine. It is typically used for more powerful rendering of scenes when you need like a very high fidelity engine. It's written in C++. There's lots of um, there's lots of different resources available as well. However, I think the vast majority of researchers use the Unity system, which is a little bit more intuitive for our purposes. There are a couple of other types of softwares that you can use. For example, there is Vizard. Vizard is a product made by WorldViz, which will you can actually pay and consult with to help you develop your own VR um, projects that you're interested in. Vizard is proprietary and it's Python based, which is very appealing for some people as well. There's also the Godot game engine, which has a lot of resources available, not as many powerful VR tools specifically, but it is an option for those of you who are confident or comfortable within Godot. And I do know some people that have actually just successfully run VR simply through Python. So CyclePy using VR packages and interacting directly with the hardware manually. The next thing that I want to briefly mention is XR frameworks. So we are interested in using these game engines to use them for virtual reality. Unity and Unreal, those game engines, they do a lot of other games, two-dimensional games. They're not simply just three-dimensional VR environments. And so we need a way for us to actually interact with those game engines for our VR purposes. It is not possible for you to directly access the VR hardware and those internal systems, at least most of the time. And so we use these XR frameworks that allows us to interact with the game engine from our experiment to communicate with the VR hardware itself. So we build our own experiment. We put it into our own game engine. We download the packages necessary for things like interaction or navigation within the actual scene for virtual reality. And then that allows us to access the VR hardware components that we are looking for. There are many different types of XR frameworks that you can use, commonly used called SDKs or software development kits. The most common, though, is ones like OpenXR, the XR Interaction Toolkit, SteamVR, and then there's plenty of other vendor SDKs. These XR development kits allow you to do certain things. So for OpenXR, and some of these are commonly used together. So for example, the OpenXR and XR Interaction Toolkit are commonly used together. OpenXR allows you to interact with multiple different types of headsets. The Interaction Toolkit has a lot of very cool scripts available for you to just plug in information about whether or not you want to interact with this or add haptics or add sensitivity. Steam VR, we operate from when running hours. Steam is a platform, a game platform that allows us to run our virtual reality headsets. And then there are plenty of other sort of the proprietary vendor SDKs that you may in fact need to use in order to do certain things with your specific headset. So Meta has their own, Vive, OpenXR has their own, Vario has their own, so on and so forth. All right. I think I'll briefly stop there. I don't think I see any questions here, but I just wanted to briefly take a break and see, does anyone have any questions before we move on?
Yeah, for the question, you can either just like unmute yourself or you can just type in the chat. Yeah, I saw Candace have a question here.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I don't know what else you're gonna go over later on, so maybe this question is even better to answer later on in the talk. But I'm currently developing a task in VR, and for me, like right now, the current challenge is like I'm developing it within Unity, but I need to have, of course, like the headset connected via the USB cable to the computer.
Mhm.
And so in order to have it like without the wire it would have to be on like the Steam store or something. And when I looked into the steps for that, that looked way more complicated than just making the task itself, unfortunately. I don't know if you're going to go over that later or.
No, it's a good question. So typically when you are going to put something on your standalone headset, you will still use a sort of wire-based system in order to transfer that data over into the actual standalone headset. I do actually know some people that have made their apps and like publish them to Steam so that they could be downloaded. It's a very complicated matter, and I definitely wouldn't suggest that. The easiest way would be for you to connect your standalone headset into the actual computer in which you develop that within, and then there are ways for you to port that directly into there and save it directly to your system. There's also and I'm not going to go over it in this talk, but there are tons of tutorials, so if you email me later I can probably direct you towards a good one to do it. The data that you will actually produce from that headset will also be on saved to your direct headset as well. And then you'll need a way, obviously, to get that into your own computer so that you can, analyze the actual data. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. I don't see any other questions, so I will go ahead and continue. So, what can we actually record or what can we measure using virtual reality? First and foremost, a VR experiment is still a psychology experiment. It's still psychological research. And so all of the core principles that we have for experimental psychology don't change when we go into VR. They're just slightly different in how we actually are thinking about these. So in a traditional experiment, you have fixation, stimulus presentation, you response, you record that data. In a VR experiment, we do the exact same thing. We script it out the exact same way, just in a different language, and we have we're placed in an environment where we have like a fixation. We present stimulus that appear, we respond or we act upon the object, and then we record those meaningful data. And so if you're translating sort of how you're thinking about doing a traditional experiment into VR, here are some of the ways that we do that, right? Instead of using the computer, we use the HMD in this virtual environment. Instead of the two dimensions, we can create three-dimensional stimuli, and we can do this within the Unity system or the Unreal Engine. You can just make the three-dimensional objects within those systems themselves, or you can import them in from other three-dimensional creators like Blender, for example. Of course, within our 3D space, we have an additional dimension. So we are measuring not only X and Y, but X, Y, and Z. Instead of just a keyboard or mouse or some type of button box, we have controllers, but we can also do things like hand track or grasp or reach or point or move our hands to indicate our response. Reaction time, we calculate the exact same way, accuracy, correct the exact same way. And then the eye tracking position on the screen from traditional eye trackers, we have integrated eye trackers within certain virtual reality headsets like the Vive Pro Eye or the Vive Focus Vision or Vario, which allows us to measure very similar things. We use our own scripting agents, so CyclePy for the vast majority of us, and instead we're going to be using a scripting agent like Unity or an Unreal or some other script. And we get trial by trial data output, and we can do that the exact same here. I've had both experiments where I collect frame by frame information, just like an eye tracker would, and I've had VR experiments where I'm just using trial level data as well. So what can we actually measure within VR? Well, we can do all of the sort of normal stuff that we do in our traditionals: reaction time, accuracy, choice, response, selection, button presses, performance in general. However, it allows us to do a lot of really cool things that we can't typically do within our traditional psychophysics. Hold on, my face over here. So things like the head position and orientation, we can track sort of the hand and head position over time, including both the X, Y, and Z location as well as rotations of those. We collect body movement data as well as sort of movements as we move through in sort of locomotion or navigation, as well as the movement of other objects moving both in the X and Y locations as well as toward and away from you, like looming objects in the Z location. And we can record things like interactions with virtual objects as well. And so when we track our head and our hands position, we have these 6 degrees of movement instead now. So if you are interested in sort of perception and action, and you are really looking for how people are moving their hands throughout the environment, not only are we measuring the X, Y, and Z cardinal directions, we are also measuring the pitch yaw roll of how you are rotating those hands or your head within the actual environment itself. We can measure your body movement as well as things like navigation, so where your hands are at any given moment, as well as how you move through the environment, what paths you took as you walked through certain things, both physically moving as your own body moving through, as well as things like you can do teleportation or transporting through the virtual environment. Interaction. So not only can we respond to objects as they appear on screen or click buttons that appear on the screen or use your mouse to click on something, within virtual reality, you can now actually use your hands and your position and your body and your space in order to interact with objects within the three-dimensional world. And you can use those instead of things like button presses. So for this task, you won't actually be able to, this is another one from my one of my experiments where we're testing reachability. You have to reach out and touch these two poles before you can continue on into the next task. And so this allows us a unique opportunity for us to sort of interact in that three-dimensional world. Eye tracking. So eye tracking is not in every headset. However, in many of the headsets that I've already mentioned, like many of the Vive or Vario, they do have integrated eye tracking. For the Vive, for example, it's from the Tobii system. And so what can we actually measure using these? We can do gaze direction, fixations, sort of saccades, dwell time, pupillometry. The reason I say sort of saccades is that a lot of ballistic style eye movements are not able to be processed, or they're just not as powerful because of the way that we are sort of moving your head. It's not a fixed location as in normal eye tracking. So there are some headsets that can do ballistic style eye movements. However, most of the time when you're using eye tracking within the virtual environment, you're going to be focusing on sort of the gaze positions or things like dwell times or where people are looking at a little bit more robustly instead of using the ballistic style of eye tracking. So, what are some of the challenges of using virtual reality? And this is sort of one of my last parts of the talk, because VR is still a very novel topic. It's a very novel methodology, and so there are still some things that are not perfect about using this system. And when you are looking at your own needs for your lab or for your own particular projects, it's very important for you to consider some of these topics. So, for example, with timing and performance, you need to keep in mind things like your frame rate and latency and your real time workload. So typically, VR headsets they're getting more powerful every single time a new one comes out. But the frame rate that we're working with is somewhere between 60 FPS is sort of the gold standard for what we're doing. However, when you have certain performance issues, especially if you're using the standalone headset, it could be very difficult to maintain that 60 FPS frame rate. Latency as well. When you are communicating with a headset that is not actually the computer system, you have to coordinate your timing between both your headset, your computer, and if you're running anything else in addition to. So, for example, if you're using mobile EEG or some type of physiology metric, it's very important for you to get on the same time lane so that you're not getting delayed by your performance. And the real-time performance, if you are generating very sort of high fidelity, if your experiment calls for a very immersive scene within your task, it can be very computationally exhausting for your system, especially if you're using like a headset. And so your performance in general is going to be dictated by your individual task needs. These can be said for a lot of traditional psychophysical experiments as well, but it's just good reminder. Additionally, there are other considerations that we want to take into account. The biggest thing that has been well documented and well studied, if you're interested, I can send you some papers, is cyber sickness. So, those of you that have actually been in a virtual reality headset, you might have experienced this, maybe you haven't. It really feels like motion sickness to some people when they're doing a VR task. And so this is very important for you, not only for yourself to be aware of, but when you start running participants, you will have to disclose this to your IRB. You'll have to disclose it to your individual participants that there is a chance for them to sort of get sick. It typically is exacerbated by things like movement. So if your task involves movement or the person is moving, or especially if the person is not moving, but the world around them is moving, it can be very triggering for those types of people who are vulnerable to cyber sickness. Calibration and fit in general. The calibration system and the eye tracking system is pretty robust, but there are some fundamental issues with being able to communicate with the actual hardware from your side of view when you are trying to run an eye tracking experiment. So there are things that it has to sort of guess or just you know uh, try to get the best measurement of your specific eye tracking needs. And these things can compound as you are going through your experiment. If you're off when you do your calibration, it could be cause a huge issue. Again, very similar to just normal eye tracking in general. However, there aren't as many procedures in place for the VR headsets to run calibrations. And so what we typically do is we run a secondary script and code that allows us to run additional validation phases that allows us to understand where the participants are moving and if any drift had occurred. And then individual differences, just in general, it's good to be aware of. Typically, when you sit a participant down for their normal task, you don't have to worry about things like glasses or their body size or how the headset fits on their face or if they're um, how tall they are necessarily. We have ways to adjust for those, but these things can be exacerbated within VR because you are in a virtual environment. And so practices like adjusting certain eye level heights to the individual as they're going through the VR experiment could be something that you would want to do. And the number one rule is And this is very important to me and those of us who are doing VR research, is that VR is a tool and a very powerful tool, but it's very important for you to use VR when your research question would benefit from using VR. If you need it to answer your question, it's very novel. And so I think people get trapped in the idea of doing this task or using this methodology because it is simply novel. It's very easy to sort of get sucked into that uh, thinking. However, it is a tool and it should be used for specific reasons. And so if you need immersiveness, if you need continuous monitoring, if you need a large, field of view, um, then VR might be for you. And especially if you need to work within depth, VR would be the task for you. So here are just some final VR good practices. So it's very important and again, these follow the same guidelines as traditional psychophysical experiments, but it's very important for you to pilot your task very, very thoroughly because there are a lot of moving parts, especially when you have this type of technology. It's very, very important for you to pilot it, and not only sort of your hardware systems, but any of the secondary, analyses or data output that you'll need for other objects. And yeah, it's very important to make sure that your timing is correct. So if you have multiple different sources of timing that you need them to be perfect, make sure that you set those very explicitly, saving raw data, and getting as much data as you possibly can. Head and hand positions. We collect head and hand positions even when we don't have specific needs for them, because they are very good for controlling, making sure the participant was looking at the correct area, making sure they were sitting down correctly, their hands and head positions were in the same place as they're doing the task. Uh, the Unity and just VR system in general that we've been using, it moves super quickly. And so making sure that you have logged all of the software, the versions, the packages that you are using and their specific versions is very important, because if you give this task to anybody else, they may not be able to run it, or they might have to figure out why it's not running on their machine if they are using a different version than you. And this is exponentially more important than things like PsychoPy, which you could probably get away with using a different version of it. Unity, especially, is not that type of way. Making sure that you are monitoring both your frame rate and drop frames. You should probably do this anyways if you're running experimental tasks, but it's very important for VR because it could be computationally exhausting for your computer unless you have like a very powerful computer itself. Making sure that you're predefining the coordinate system and your spatial reference frames. VR uses multiple different types of reference frames. You can use the real world as it would appear out in the real world, or you could use a egocentric or allocentric frame of reference when you're producing objects. So it's very important for you to make that explicitly known. And then calibration and exclusion criteria, of course, before you're actually doing your data collection. All right, so I have a few resources for those of you that are interested. The first of which comes from Dr. Erwan David. He has a workshop for Unity VR for human sciences. I have the link here for that. I can't remember exactly when the next one will be, or if you can just sign up. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Erwan. Uh, and he goes over a lot of the basic tutorial about how to get started, how to actually integrate it and packages and things like that. Uh, on a related note, I'll just quickly plug Dr. Erwan is actually looking for either a PhD or a postdoc to join in his lab at Le Mans University. He will be this project involves mobile EEG and eye tracking in VR. You will be working closely with Melissa Vo from LMU in Munich, which is also my lab. So you would be working very closely with me. If you are interested, please send Erwan a message, an email for that. And then just a few other additional resources that I have here. The Unity specific software is very good about keeping track of all of their implementation. So looking just at their specs and their forums is very useful. However, they have a full tutorial set about how to get started using Unity. There is a private a YouTuber called Valum Tutorials who makes a lot of games and things within the Unity system, and he does a lot of VR work. I would definitely recommend checking out some of his videos. It's going to be somewhat different from what you'll normally be programming. However, a lot of the fundamentals are there. He'll help you download the actual task. He'll have you install the certain packages and go over how to do that. It's very, very, very helpful. And I followed him through a lot of his initial tutorials. And then if you are interested in using something like the Unreal Engine, there is a brilliant 5-hour course, which I went through a few years ago from freecodecamp.com again on YouTube, which was very helpful in understanding sort of the basics of Unreal, if that is something that you're interested in contributing to. All right. Thank you very much for listening. That is my talk. I'm open to any questions that you may have. And if you do have any other questions that maybe are more complex or you don't want to ask here today, feel free to send me a message at michael-paavola@uiowa.edu. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. So we'll take questions either from the chat or from you can just unmute yourself. There are questions in the chat, but I also see people raise their hand. So maybe Lucas, you can, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, sure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, hello, thank you. Hello, everyone. So, I was wondering, so is it better actually to go for Unity or Unreal? So because so I was starting to play around a little bit. It was more like a hobby with a future goal of making a VR experiment. I don't know, 7 years ago, I think there was plenty of documentation for Unity, but there was nothing for Unreal. But I know that people are making super powerful things in Unreal. I was wondering, what's the state of the art today? Which software would you recommend? It's a little bit like Psych Toolbox or PsychoPar.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I definitely would say Unity is the best engine for most people to use. I would say Unreal is a very good, powerful second option for those people who really need high performance, which I think that Unity lacks a little bit. However, for the vast majority of research and psychological research specifically, Unity is going to be a lot easier for people to integrate with. There are a lot more documentation online. There are a lot of people who use Unity and have very similar questions. And I think Unity is just a better engine in general for what we need. It also does help that some of the biggest labs and people that are actually using VR in their research, we do use Unity almost primarily. And we've played around with other things too. However, it has been by far the best. The best thing to do actually is if you're stuck, like if you have to do a weird thing in Unity, it's really easy to just ask a question online. And you have a ton of like game developers that use Unity, and game developers are a VR developer's best friend. Like if we're using VR for our psych research, like game developers also have weird questions that they want to do, like how do I make this thing follow you or do this thing? And so it's very easy to sort of communicate and follow the forums and ask questions. And I just think Unity is definitely the best engine.
Thank you very much. Just it goes a little bit with this question, so it goes with you. Okay, so we have Unity, and in terms of the system, the head-mounted display, so
Mhm.
is there something that goes better today? There's tons of different HMDs, and I was wondering, okay, so let's say I go for Unity. Is there more research-friendly headset?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's sort of tricky. Unity can work with pretty much every system, which is very good. And so it really depends on what your needs as a lab is. So for example, in both of my labs, we need eye tracking within our headset. And it's actually not like too much more expensive to have that integrated eye tracking. So I kind of recommend getting it, even if you don't have any initial plans of using it. And so for the systems that we would primarily be using, so like the Vive Pro Eye or the Vive Focus Vision, these ones Unity is perfect for. In fact, Unity is primarily what people are using for those um, different headsets. In addition to like Vario, for example, there are some that like get a little bit more proprietary. So like Meta, for example. You'll have to integrate a little bit, but it's totally not an issue to use Unity, obviously, in there. There just might be a couple extra steps or a couple different buttons you might pick that are meta specific or Oculus specific. But I would say I've had very good luck with the Vive series. The Pro Eye actually is discontinued, I believe now, and so we switched over to the Focus Vision, which has been very, very, very good for us. So that's probably where I would recommend you to start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there are also questions from the chat. So Mike, if you can check that, like what could cause the timing to be off when there are multiple sensors simultaneously collecting data, for example, eye tracking and motion capture, or even when just recording trial level data, for example, are teasing to interact with the game objects. So would you mind
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah, so when I was talking about timing specifically, it was mostly in terms of if you have some external system as well as using the internal system. So the VR headsets themselves in Unity and things like that, they work very similarly, if not identically, to those of the timing you'll get from CyclePy. So the timing won't be off per se, but you run into those same issues as like if you're presenting things for a frame at this amount of at this power, you'll be displaying it for 16.6 repeating milliseconds versus some other aspect. So the timing, what I was specifically referring to is if you have to connect that timing to like mobile EEG, for example, where you need those to be identical to get the proper sort of time point. Um, and then and I don't know much about motion capture. It's a good question. Motion capture is another thing that obviously you can do, or mocap in VR. I'm assuming it's also very similar to that, where you'll need to sort of get your timings together because it's an external system that probably uses the internal hardware, but there might be different sort of frame rates and things like that. Um, so I think I answered that. I see next it says also for your tasks, I assume you had to have a portable computer of some sort and not just a PC. Do you have any recommendations for laptop specs? And Valium Tutorials is awesome. Yes, Valium Tutorials is very good. Again, I don't know. I'm just plugging random people, but yes, I have run certain VR tasks from my laptop. The laptop itself is pretty powerful. I don't really have specifics on how sort of powerful it needs to be. I would probably recommend going and looking at Unity specifically and seeing what they recommend for a minimum CPU or graphics card. The big thing for performance on laptops is making sure that you have a good enough graphics card, a good enough CPU, enough dedicated RAM, obviously, to do that. Ours weren't too expensive when we purchased them. I think they were around $2,000 for our laptops. It might be a little bit pricey for some folks, but for especially from laptops because they are much more minimal than our big powerful computer towers are. It's probably pretty important for you to get a very powerful laptop to run it. Yeah. Okay. Are there
And
any other questions?
yeah, and if you have questions, you can also, I assume, Mike, you don't mind, you can just send Mike the email if you have more specific questions towards like more detailed information about VR and how it used in experimental psychology. And also, after the workshop, we'll upload this. Yes, we'll upload this to on the OPAM website, both the recording and Mike also said he want to share the information here, share his slides here, so that you can check the information via the OPAM website there.
I think
Yes.
Lucas, you have a question?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but if anyone
Yeah.
is not
That's
asking,
totally fine.
I have
Yeah,
a
Yeah.
list of questions. So
sure.
during your talk, you said that actually saccades are difficult to measure because of
Yes.
I think you said head movements, and I was wondering why. Because in theory, I don't have experience so far with it, but in theory, you have also the head motion, so you can just discount the vectors, and poof, you have the the saccade. So why is it challenging? Because actually, this is of big interest as well to me. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And I'm familiar with this. I'm not necessarily an expert as to the actual technical reasons as to why this is. However, eye tracking is very good within virtual reality. It's really just the sort of ballistic style movements where you need a higher fidelity of the sort of amplitude of the saccade in order to calculate the actual saccade in that ballistic movement. And VR, from what I'm aware of, on certain VR headsets, it's just not that sensitive to the eye movements that you are trying to calculate. Uh, VR eye tracking is very unlike normal eye tracking. And for our eye tracking, our typical eye tracking, we have, SR Research's iLink thousands, and it takes very precise sort of control. You don't move your head at all, and then you can calculate those the saccade amplitude and the landing position and the overall ballistics of it a lot easier. With the added pressure of the movement of the head, my guess is that that is just not as sensitive within certain headsets. Like I said, though, there are some that are better, and that's probably why they're a little bit more expensive. I believe, don't take my word for this, but I believe that the Vario does have the ability to measure certain ballistic style eye movement questions. And Vario, for that reason, which is a very good research grade VR headset, is much more expensive, closer to $8,000 or $10,000 for a headset. And so, yeah, when we are doing our tasks, we can't calculate that. We are only calculating things like the gaze position at any given moment, um, and or the dwell time, or the pupillometry is actually pretty good within the VR headset. So those types of things are the only things that we can actually measure.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds challenging indeed. Yeah, Vario, I think they got even 2000 hertz eye tracker right now, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes. The VR headsets unfortunately are not 2000 hertz. It would be great, but yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Candace, I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah, what you just said sparked my question. I that's so interesting that pupillometry is good in VR. So like how do you equalize the luminance in like because I've only worked in Unity and just thinking about it, like I don't think there's a setting to like change the luminance values on anything. So like how did you do that?
Or, yeah. So when I say pupillometry is good, what I mean is that it's measurable and that people have produced work and research that have used it. I have actually not personally used it. I do want to use it for one of my upcoming tasks. Um, I know that the sort of system that we have internal cameras that face the eye, and they are used to sort of measure the rotation of the eyes, but they are also using them to measure sort of your pupils within those. So I'm not exactly sure, like all of the sort of very specific questions that might come up about how to control things like luminance or how to make sure that you're actually measuring the full distance of the pupil. But I know that it is possible and that people have had seemingly good results using that, although it may be rudimentary for at least my understanding. I'm not sure.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks.
Just wondering if there's any other questions. Just give it. Okay, then thanks again for Mike giving us this wonderful workshop tutorial. And again, if you are interested in this, please follow up with our future OPAM workshop. And everybody have a good day. See ya.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.